Look at what's going on now with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Our government was rushing, to accept sanctions against Russia. Why would we do that? It's not the United Nations that has declared war on Russia. And I really don't like what Putin did. Don't get me wrong. War is always a very bad fact, or happening, and we should avoid war by all means. But even though, there is a clear attacker, an aggressor, and somebody that has been attacked, we must not enter into this good-evil scheme and taking a position, because as a neutral state, we're not obliged, or we should keep away from judging actions, but rather offering a platform to end aggression. That's what we should do. And that's why if we support sanctions against Russia, we're actually a party of the war, and we can't offer any support. We can't act as a neutral state anymore. So that's precisely what happened. That's precisely what we need to stop in the future, because neutrality is something that strengthens our country and not the opposite.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and I'm here today with Dr. Stephan Rietiker, who is a Swiss-US dual national, a business leader, entrepreneur, and a licensed physician in the United States and in Switzerland. He currently manages his own longevity and well-being focused company called Epilunar Partners. He's also the founder of Inside Corona, a platform that has been critically evaluating government measures and policies during the pandemic. Since 2022, he has been serving as the president of Pro-Switzerland, a libertarian NGO and think tank strongly advocating for independent, national and business-oriented policies. As such, he's also a member of the initiative committee to create a public referendum on strengthening Switzerland's neutrality. The initiative for the referendum is what we are here to discuss today. So thank you, Dr. Rietiker, for joining me.
My pleasure. Hello.
Dr. Rietiker, before we start, I think I would very briefly want to explain to our international audience that in Switzerland's direct democratic system, in addition to the usual kind of parliamentary framework that we've got in a lot of democracies, we've also got two very important instruments, right? The referendum instrument, which allows us to block any laws that come from parliament if people don't like it, and the second one is the initiative, right, where like people with a Swiss passport can write our own little article of the constitution, and if we manage to gather within 18 months 100,000 signatures, then the government will be forced to hold a public vote on this, and if more than 50% of people and more than 50% of cantons say yes, then that little part of the constitutional text that we wrote will become part of the Swiss constitution. Now, you or the people associated with you in this referendum, in this initiative for strengthening Switzerland's neutrality, you did that. There's now a referendum text, and you're gathering signatures since about October or November last year. And could you please tell us what this neutrality referendum is about? Why is it important? And how's the signature gathering going so far?
Well, the importance, obviously, is that the people of Switzerland can force the government to do certain things, if you have enough signatures. And we firmly believe that neutrality needs to be redefined or defined more specifically, which we do, and be part of our constitution. And that's what we're aiming at. It should strengthen our government, our federal council, and not the opposite. And neutrality has nothing to do with cowardice or anything. It's a very strong position. It needs courage. And hence we believe, that by precisely defining what neutrality is and what we can expect and what our partners can expect from us, That's why we want to add this to the Constitution. Now, that said, you need 100,000 signatures to move forward, and that doesn't mean per se that you're going to win, the referendum, but it at least gives you a pretty stable cushion, to kick it off. For confidentiality reasons, I can't give you the precise number where we stand, but we're very optimistic that we'll get the number needed pretty soon.
But, worldwide, Switzerland is probably the most famous case of a neutral country because we've been doing this for 200 plus years. But is neutrality not already part of the Swiss constitution?
Well, it is, but we just want to make sure that it cannot be altered. If you have, let's say we have the Ukraine conflict where certain groups try to redefine neutrality or think, no, for this very case, we want to change neutrality or we want to be flexible and by applying certain other rules. And that's not what we want. We want to be a reliable partner. Our partners in the world need to understand that we are reliable. They need to completely understand what we mean by being neutral, and not that neutrality can change as we go ahead. And now certain people say, well, the neutrality has been interpreted in one way during World War II. That's precisely why going forward, we want to have clarity on either side. That's why we need to add certain aspects to the Constitution to make it abundantly clear who we are, what we want, and where people can count on us and our support, our humanitarian support, and the good offices.
Yeah, and maybe to clarify, our constitution mentions neutrality in 2 places, but it never defines it. So there's been this constant struggle, right? For like, what does our neutrality mean? And if you go to the right side of the spectrum or the left side, they have like completely different ideas. Not completely. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but we don't have it defined, especially not in a text as fundamental as the Constitution.
Yeah, that's what certain groups now claim. They say, well, give our federal council the necessary freedom and liberties, to negotiate on our behalf. We don't want the government to have power and to work, in a power game. We want our government to protect us and to guarantee our welfare, and security and freedom. That's what we want. That's what the Swiss people authorizes our government to do. And our government has to understand it's the Swiss people that dictates the rules, not the other way around. This is pretty unique. By the way, I'd like to add, there is another country in Europe, that's Austria, that has a very similar way, and they are having similar discussions in their country.
They are. The one thing they lack is a binding direct democratic instrument through which you can force something on the government. And what you're saying is like, the Swiss population has always distrusted its own government, which is why we have these moments where we can force something, which sometimes we get our way, sometimes not. But it is a powerful instrument, and you're trying to use it at the moment. And that's my question: like, why go through a popular initiative? Why is there no parliamentary discussion? Because Parliament could do a very similar thing. Why not through Parliament?
Well, I believe it has to come from the people. Ultimately, it's the people that need to clarify what they want. We intentionally go through the people because basically the people will bear the burden down the road. So they have to understand the pros and cons. It always has pros and cons. But we believe that the pros by far outweigh the cons. And we have to use this means, of a referendum to explain neutrality to our people. Because if you go to schools nowadays, at our days, we in the old days, we would have spent perhaps 1 year in Swiss history and understand, what neutrality meant and all the nitty gritty. Nowadays, our Swiss students, they don't have a clue what's going on, to be pretty honest, and it's quite shocking to me. So we need to do what actually our schools should do, is educate the people and let them know what exactly neutrality means and what has to be done.
Yeah, although neutrality is a very flexible concept, especially if you look at the different ways that different countries at the moment interpret it. And maybe give me the chance to read out the 4 paragraphs that your committee proposes, because the definition in there is quite interesting. First, Switzerland shall be neutral. Its neutrality shall be perpetual and armed. 2, Switzerland shall not join any military or defense alliance. Cooperation with such alliances is reserved for the event of a direct military attack on Switzerland or in the event of acts in preparation for such an attack. 3rd, Switzerland shall not take part in military conflicts between third states and shall not take any coercive non-military measures against belligerent states. That would be sanctions. This is subject to obligations towards the United Nations organizations and measures to prevent the circumvention of non-military coercive measures by other states. And 4th, Switzerland uses its perpetual neutrality for the prevention and resolution of conflicts and is available as a mediator. This is a beautiful text, I must say, and I'm studying neutrality for a while now. This is like this quite encompassing, and also like brings the Swiss neutrality out of the Cold War into what we are currently in, whatever we want to call it. Could you tell me what is to you the most important part of this proposal, how to structure Swiss neutrality?
Well, every single point is important. You know, it's as a total. It makes sense. Look at what's going on now with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Our government was rushing, to accept sanctions against Russia. Why would we do that? It's not the United Nations that has declared war on Russia. And I really don't like what Putin did. Don't get me wrong. War is always a very bad fact, or happening, and we should avoid war by all means. But even though, there is a clear attacker, an aggressor, and somebody that has been attacked, we must not enter into this good-evil scheme and taking a position, because as a neutral state, we are not obliged, or we should keep away from judging actions, but rather offering a platform to end aggression. That's what we should do. And that's why if we support sanctions against Russia, we're actually a party of the war, and we can't offer any support. We can't act as a neutral state anymore. So that's precisely what happened. That's precisely what we need to stop in the future, because neutrality is something that strengthens our country and not the opposite.
So the Swiss government at the moment argues that the neutrality policy that it uses at the moment, the differential neutrality policy, means Switzerland only stays away from the hot shooting war, right? We are not taking sides in the hot shooting war, and actually we are not exporting weapons to either side. But you're saying that coercive measures, especially like sanctions, right, are part and parcel of the war that's going on, and Switzerland should also refrain from joining them, which it did. It copy-pasted one to one the European sanctions, right? How would Switzerland deal with the problem that the United States, but also Europe recently started implementing secondary sanctions on states that do not implement their sanction systems, if that text came through?
Well, one thing I want to tell you very clearly: threats don't work with us, and they must not work. We're not going to be threatened, number one. Number two, we need to explain our foreign policy. As part of the foreign policy, we have neutrality. That's the obligation of our government to explain that, not only in a case when we have a war, but when we have peace. This is an ongoing process, and we shouldn't even have to have that discussion right now, because there are even a lot of politicians and business people in the United States that not only understand our concept of neutrality, but truly appreciate it. That's what I hear on a daily basis. So it's up to us to be honest, straightforward, explain what our goals are, and try to be an actor in a peace-giving and peace-securing process. And that's what we need to do. And that is highly appreciated. What we have now is Europe that follows the United States in a proxy war, but that's by no means the entire world. Guess what happens when China or Russia, which we hope will never happen, engage in hostile activities against Europe and the United States? What is Switzerland going to do? Are they going to support China even if they're being threatened? No, we have to keep out of those hostilities, be truly neutral, be reliable, and sell our neutrality concept to all the world so they understand where we are, where we stand, and what we stand for.
Especially both sides. It's quite clear that at the moment, Russia does not view Switzerland as very neutral. Back in August last year, Mr. 𝗟𝗧𝗏 asked Switzerland to actually become the protecting power of Ukraine in Russia, and then Russia refused to accept that because they said the Swiss are not neutral. They are siding with the West. We don't trust the guys, which I actually understand.
I completely understand their position, although I hate it. I would prefer that we were neutral, that we kept out of the sanctions. And just because we get some pressure from Germany or other countries doesn't mean that we give up our concept.
So where do you think is this idea coming from, which won a lot of support recently, that being neutral means supporting the wrong side of history, right? I mean, the Swedes and the Finns gave up their neutrality or non-alignment policies, saying that they want to be together with the West. And now Switzerland, Austria too, and Ireland to some extent, we are hearing this accusation that your neutrality is helping Putin. What do you tell people who say that?
No, it helps the world. Neutrality helps the world. But listen, what you see is people are changing their mind like they're changing their underwear. We had the same discussion in Switzerland. The same people, the same parties, the left parties, the Green Party, and the FDP were supporting more stringent measures, or more stringent policies on the export of weapons. Now, the very same people want to go back to where they came from. This has nothing to do with a good character. This has nothing to do with reliability. This is a roller coaster of emotions, of policies that doesn't trigger any reliability or friendship amongst other countries. As long as we kowtow to some pressure at any moment, we will never be considered a reliable partner. So we need to show and prove that neutrality is a serious matter that we take very seriously, and we don't give up just because we get some pressure from one or another side.
This aspect that you're mentioning is very, very interesting. So in Switzerland, the Social Democrats and the left-leaning parties used to be traditionally the anti-war and anti-weapons export parties. And now those very forces are trying to allow trying to change Swiss law in order to allow other states that have like Swiss weapons to export them to Ukraine. How do you explain that? And they're also very strongly anti-neutralist. And I am a paying member of the Social Democratic Party, but I don't understand it. I don't understand where my party went. And it makes no sense to me. And does it make sense to you?
Oh, it's a dirty trick behind the whole thing. What they ultimately want is to move us closer to the European Union. That's why they want to give up on our defense. They whatever they can to damage our army, they do. They don't support the army. They want to force us into outsourcing our national defense into NATO, and they want us to have such pressure economically, financially, that we have to move into the European Union. That's behind the whole thing, nothing else.
I used to be in favor of Switzerland joining the European Union. I have, in the meantime, changed my mind on that.
Thank God.
The problem that we have in Switzerland is, right, whatever we do, we'll always be inside of Europe, right? So, and the European Union is all around us. So there needs to be a way to get along, right? I mean, Switzerland is part of the whole European network of economies. But how do you see that this neutrality concept could help Switzerland also integrate in the larger European framework? Because what I understand from your homepage, Pro-Switzerland, is like you recognize that Switzerland is part of Europe, right? So how do you see that?
Part of Europe, but not part of the European Union. It's part of the continent. Our neutrality will help us do a better risk management assessment. Switzerland is a little bit, and I've been heavily criticized for that statement, but I mean, look, as an entrepreneur, you manage a company and you have to do a risk assessment. You have to do the same as when you manage a country, although a country, of course, doesn't have shareholders. And so I understand the difference, but you have stakeholders. And we need to do a risk assessment by simply focusing on the European Union, that, by the way, economically goes down the tube. We would seriously damage our future economic development. So what we need to do is focus on other partnerships that would enable Switzerland to enter into very good and long-standing wealth development programs, and we can offer certain things, technology-wise, services-wise. So why don't we focus on a good relationship with China, with Korea, with Japan, also with the United States, where to date we still don't have a free trade agreement. We need to open the realm and see where we can do business. And certainly neutrality will be a great vector towards that goal, and not just focusing on the European Union.
A lot of people misunderstand. They think that neutrality is only a military concept, but in fact, neutrality emerged out of the Mediterranean Sea of the 600-700 years ago as an economic concept in order to allow states that are currently not fighting wars as the others do to deal with everybody. And right now, what we are seeing is that this is being turned on its head, right? It's being said that if you deal with both parties, you are a warmonger. I mean, you're supporting war. But the point is, we just don't want to be at war, so we want to deal with everyone, right? And this could be used to actually increase also peace and stability in Europe.
Absolutely. And what many people, even in Switzerland, don't understand is that the good-evil pattern disappears for a neutral state. We're not supposed to take a position. You can do as an individual, but not as a state, as a country. So we, by avoiding being judgmental on either party, we have the possibility to offer a platform for peace negotiations. And that's very valuable. And many countries acknowledge the value of this position. We just have to constantly sell it to our partners and not give up and be reliable.
Another thing that we could do that I've never seen Switzerland even trying, not even thinking about, is to try to create more ties with other neutral states, with Austria, with Ireland. And those are states that are inside the European Union, neutrals in the EU. We're a neutral outside the EU. There's like Mongolia, for instance. There's even at the moment also Moldova is still to some part trying to be neutral. Do you think that there's a way forward for neutrals to foster bonds that they could use in order to strengthen the network of like international relations on the continent?
I think we should absolutely do that and engage in such discussions. However, in Austria, I think neutrality is heavily tied to a right-wing party. So I'm not sure whether the concept of neutrality is widely understood in Austria, but I agree that we should start to kick off discussions with several countries. But even if we were alone, I would certainly advocate, that we have to move forward and make other people understand. By the way, the former ambassador of the US to Switzerland firmly believes that neutrality is highly valuable to other countries.
I have a lot of connections to Austria, to Vienna, and the Austrians understand neutrality very well. And they also there's a good group that wants to defend it. The interesting thing is that in Switzerland, it's the Social Democrats that are most ardently against. I mean, well, not they don't want to sink it, but they want to keep it as small as possible. In Austria, the Social Democrats are the ones who try to defend it. whereas in Switzerland, it's the right-wing People's Party that wants to defend it. I wonder where this is going and why it is that in Switzerland it's rather the right side that wants to defend it rather than the left.
Well, I'm not familiar enough with the situation in other countries to make that determination. However, I believe we should kick off discussions and find out. And every country will do what it's right for their special case, as we will do. By the way, I have been approached by people outside Switzerland to discuss our concept. So this may well end or turn out to be the case that we will have discussions across the border. However, we really need to focus on the Swiss case. That's very particular. And but since we're also having economic discussions with other countries, I think it's important that we try to make people understand what's going on. And I actually fully subscribe to those over the border, across the border discussions.
And coming back to the referendum or to the initiative that you're
Yes.
part of, where do you find most support? From which corners of society do you find most support, and which corners are fighting most strongly against you? And maybe in this discussion, where's the Swiss media? Where do they stand on this one? Are they neutral on the discussion, or do you find a lot of pushback from them?
Well, the media, they don't like the narrative. So they are, for the most part, not all, some of the media are on our side, but let's say the big mainstream media, they either neglect us or they go after us. But that doesn't matter to me right now. But it's very interesting to see. We get support from different parties. We get support from the left side, from the Green Liberals. We get pushback from people from the right-wing party, or the People's Party. For the most part, I would say support is coming from the right-wing party, but we have pushback as well. So there is no general pattern right now. We can only statistically analyze it when we have all our signatures together. But even then, I think there will be some question marks. So we just have to do a very good job making people understand what neutrality means. I think sometimes we have to do one-on-one discussions. We have people that write us a nasty letter. I pick up the phone, call the person, and say, "Well, what's your problem? Why are you so upset? Why are you so angry?" And you end up in a good discussion, and I could even try to convince people, and people said, "Okay, I'm going to think about my position. Perhaps you're right." So I had some very interesting and also positive outcomes on some of those very personal discussions.
And what would you say is your biggest challenge at the moment for this initiative to get it through? Is it to create a public space to discuss it? Is it the nitty-gritty of getting the signatures?
Well, I'm very confident that we'll get the signatures, and the sooner we can report that we have the signatures, the better, for us and also for the forthcoming elections. I think the most critical thing is the media and get the platform, and we need to be very creative to bypass those media that block us. It is a modern form of censorship that we see in other areas, and that's one of the things that Pro-Switzerland will take care of. We need to avoid censorship. We have to create and develop new tools that bypass censorship, and we have to make sure that the censorship from the media doesn't prevail in the long term.
So overall, with the initiative, you're trying to push the concept closer into the political heart of Switzerland, right? Because
exactly, which we also do in Pro-Switzerland. We're considered, primarily right-wing people, which is actually no longer true. More and more we get support from, let's say, the people from the middle, We also have a certain degree of green liberals that support us. And that's the way, I'm not a politician. I want to deal with areas that are of utmost importance to the future development of our country. So we're not a political party. We don't intend to be a political party, but we fight for those topics and areas where we believe it's absolutely necessary that we come to good conclusions for Switzerland.
Would it be correct to call you a think tank, or how would you describe yourself in the English language?
Think tank is not active enough. We're not only thinking, but we're also doing certain things. Yeah. So I would, perhaps the best way to describe it is an entrepreneurial think tank. We develop ideas, concepts. We try to gain majorities by being entrepreneurial and very proactive. That's probably so. It's an entrepreneurial, proactive platform that wants to defend certain critical values of the Swiss people, which are, sovereignty, freedom, wealth, security, safety, and a strong army.
Okay. The interesting thing is your positions are very clear because you also lined them out, right? So it's quite easy to say, like, am I for this or am I against this?
Absolutely. So we don't want to be wishy-washy. No, it has to be absolutely clear what we want, but we're also open to other opinions, to a discourse. So we fight against censorship. If other people with another opinion want to talk to us, we're open to discussions. We're not censoring or shouting down other people.
I admire that very much, I must say, because it's difficult in this day and age to find people who are willing to listen to something that you are not already convinced of yourself.
Yeah, but I think that's our duty. That's a duty, and that's how we develop opinions. When you talk, and one thing that is really very critical for us is, we have to find means and ways to convince our young people. Our young people don't watch TV. They don't read newspapers, which we do. So we have to find the channels to approach them, which we're in the process of developing. So we have a team of young guys that support us. They say, well, that's ridiculous. This language is ridiculous. You have to do it differently. And we have to learn. I'm over 60 years old. I don't know the nitty-gritty of what the young people feel. So we have to have the right advisors that tell us that's the way to approach the young people. And the young people are the future of the country. If we can't reach the young people, we're making a fundamental mistake.
That is right. While at the same time, not everything that is young is automatically correct.
No, but at least we have to offer or provide them a platform for discourse and discussion, and then we can try to convince them. But at least we have to reach them by just focusing on television and classical newspapers. We're never going to reach them.
Right, exactly.
And I think that's highly fascinating, to develop a very broad communication strategy.
That is fundamental for any kind of activism, which I think we both are engaged in because we want to get certain messages across. Just the other thing is like convincing also the political establishment and also the administration. One of the things that surprised me the most of the last couple of years when I found it out is that, do you know that Switzerland does officially not recognize the Treaty of 1815 that established our neutrality in the first place and established our external borders. The 1815 treaty is not, with the powers of the Vienna Congress, is not part of the catalog of treaties that we currently recognize.
But we still abide by it. So
of course, it's our borders that they give us, but
exactly.
The answer that I got from the federal administration is that Switzerland only acceded to the treaty and therefore did not negotiate it and therefore does not feel bound to it and therefore does not feel that neutrality is a promise it made that it has to keep under international law. It's a promise that it can renege any time. That's the answer I got from the federal administration, and that shocked me quite a bit.
It might be legally true, but that's even more a reason why we as the people have to stand up and do something about it. It's the people that decide and not the government.
I would argue it's legally wrong because under international law, an accession is legally equal to negotiating at the same time. Otherwise, all of the treaties that we accede to would be invalid. But let's leave that aside. What you're saying is correct.
I'm not a lawyer, and my legal advisors tell me that we can go ahead as we do. So I trust them. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm a medical doctor.
So, and the initiative itself is clearly a political instrument in order to also have a discussion in the entire country, and then hopefully take a decision, hopefully a positive one, for neutrality, and like put the discussion also to rest for some time, I suppose.
Absolutely, but never say never. It may always pop up. Certain people have difficulties in our country to accept a verdict from the people. On either side, by the way, and as such, I'm confident and hopeful that we will win this referendum. But it's an uphill battle, absolutely, and we know that, and we know it's a lot of work ahead of us to convince the people. But overall, from what I hear now, also from people that are not part of the right wing, I'm confident that we can move in the right direction.
Maybe a last question. So what's the timeline? Because you have about 1 year left to get the signatures, and let's suppose you get them. Around what time would the referendum then be voted on?
Well, we're hopeful that we can close the signature part this year. So that means there's another 18 to 24 months. I know that. So, but of course, we need to keep the temperature high. And still, it's not a matter of only voting. Once we have the votes, then only the campaigns will start. And then we have to be prepared. So that's what we're doing right now. We're preparing for the campaign, for the discussion, and so but it's a lot of work, and we know it's going to be an uphill battle, but I still think we can win it.
I would say there's not, at least not a bad chance for winning there once you get it. And Dr. Rietiker,
we cannot be cavalier about it, we have to be very humble, and we have to do the ground game. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but overall, I'm still confident.
It's a big one, because if in case you lost this one, it would be a significant dent in Swiss neutrality, and it might lead Switzerland the path of Sweden and Finland toward NATO integration. That might happen too. So Switzerland, there is another one of these moments when a lot of the future will be decided on its international.
We're at the crossroads. Exactly. We're at the crossroads, and it's very important, and we feel the obligation and the burden.
Well, I'll support you from the left, because I think your idea is correct, and I share your view on how Switzerland could use its neutrality internationally to help stability and make itself a platform. Dr. Rietiker, thank you very much for taking the time today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.